I'll send you to that nursing home one way or another, and gladly, my son said, but he had no idea. Good evening, my name is Name, and tonight I want to tell you a story that's part warning, part confession, and all heartbreak. It's about how quickly the language we use with the people we love can become the map that guides our own fate or theirs. When he said those words, my son was exhausted. He'd been with me at the hospital for 3 nights straight. My hands were swollen from IV lines, my voice was thin from coughing, and my memory was patchy like a photograph left in the rain. He saw me as the problem, as a burden. He saw an expense on a spreadsheet, an interruption to plans, a little inconvenience that could be moved out of sight. I'll send you to that nursing home one way or another, and gladly, he said, and his voice was flat. I felt the sentence like cold water poured over a fevered head, but I surprised him. I laughed, I smiled, I asked him to hold my hand. He had no idea. He didn't know the nights I had stayed up teaching him to read by flashlight. He didn't remember the bicycle with a bent wheel I had fixed with a screwdriver and spit. He didn't remember the Christmas when I wrapped his homework in shiny paper because we couldn't afford the toy he wanted. He hadn't yet learned the long arithmetic of love, how small mercies add up to a life, how patience and stories and casseroles and bandaged knees are saved the way people save for rain. We often talk about care as a transaction, time in exchange for money, services in exchange for convenience. But care is also a ledger written with memory. When you care for someone, you are keeping a history in your hands. When you refuse to care, or when you speak of removing care as if it were trash, you are erasing pages from that history. I want to tell you about one evening after the diagnosis. The doctors were thorough, their words polite and precise. The bills were not polite. My son stood by the window with his back to me, the city lights cutting his outline like a knife. He spoke again of options, of assisted living, of moving me out of the house. He spoke as if the house were a warehouse and I were inventory. I could have been furious. I could have said, "Fine, sign the papers." Instead, I told him what he did not know. I told him about the time I sold the coat off my back so he could attend a class. I told him how I once went hungry for 2 days so he could have medicine. I told him how I watched him fall in love, how I watched him fail, and I had always been there, not as an unpaid employee, not as a social obligation, but as the person who loved him in a way that would not be measured on a spreadsheet. You do not suddenly become callous. You are taught the economy of indifference the way someone teaches a child to count. We live in a culture that often counts people by what they produce, what they cost, and too rarely by what they have given us. We congratulate ourselves for efficiency while outsourcing what used to be our sacred responsibilities, listening, holding, and staying. So what do we do when the people we love become a problem? First, we remember, tell the stories, say them out loud until memory is louder than resentment. If your father once stood in the rain to buy you a meal, say it. If your mother held your hand through a panic attack at 3 a.m, say it. Memory is a debt that must be repaid not with money but with respect. Second, we plan, agging matters medically, legally, emotionally. A plan doesn't mean you're choosing to abandon anyone, it means you're choosing dignity. Have conversations early, not when tempers are high and options are few. Discuss wishes, finances, powers of attorney, and what quality of life looks like for the person who will one day be older. Planning is not betrayal, it is compassion in the form of preparation. Third, we check our language. Threats are not dramatic punctuation to a conversation, they are blueprints. Saying, "I'll send you away," plants a seed that can grow into action. Use language that honors relationship. Speak with the humility that comes from having once been cared for yourself. Finally, we practice humility. Anyone in this room may one day be in the same chair, the same thin robe, requiring patience that is hard. When you are young and angry and exhausted, you may imagine how you will act when the roles reverse. Make a promise to yourself now. You will choose mercy over convenience. You will remember. My son had no idea because he had never been told. He had never been asked to carry my stories in his pockets. That night I sat with him, and through my fatigue I spoke. He listened long enough to hear that the economy of our household had been built on small, repeated sacrifices. He heard the ledger of love. He cried, embarrassed and ashamed, and we began to plan. We cannot guarantee that every child will become a saint when pushed, but we can teach, we can prepare, and we can insist that the language we use with one another be worthy of the history between us. Threats and ultimatums unravel more than just feelings, they unravel trust. If you find yourself tempted to say, "I'll send you to that nursing home one way or another," and gladly, stop. Think of the nights someone kept you warm. Think of the stories that built you. Sit down, keep the hand you once held, and remember. Because one day, when you are older and the light has shifted in your own room, you will want, above all, to be remembered. And the kind of remembrance you receive will be the kind of care you asked for and gave in return. Thank you. You know, baby, people love to talk about how much they do for others. I work 2 jobs, they say. I paid the bills. But let me tell you something, it's the quiet, invisible things that weigh the most. The things nobody saw you do and nobody thanked you for. Those are the ones that carve deep into your bones and stay there long after the world forgets. When my son told me, I'll send you to that nursing home one way or another, and gladly, I didn't even have the strength to argue. My heart didn't break, it just sighed. Because I remembered every night I stayed awake watching him breathe as a baby, terrified that fever would take him before morning. I remembered patching the holes in his shoes before school so the other kids wouldn't laugh. I remembered selling my wedding ring the year he turned 12 so I could buy him a proper winter coat. And I thought how quickly a lifetime of love can turn invisible when someone gets tired. People think care is just a task, something you can check off a list. Feed, bathe, medicate, repeat. But care is a story, honey. It's a story you tell with your hands, your patience, your sacrifice. When you're young, you give without thinking because that child's laughter feels like sunlight. You never stop to write down what you gave. And one day, they grow up and they see only the bills, the noise, the inconvenience. They don't see the years that were traded quietly away. There's a certain loneliness that comes with age. It's not just being alone in a room. It's being unseen by the very eyes you once taught to see. When I looked at my son that night, standing by the window, all tall and proud and tired, I realized he didn't know the weight of my care because I'd carried it so silently. He had no idea what it cost me to give him a life that looked easy. That's the problem with silent love. It makes people believe it was effortless. It makes them think it was free. I think about my own mama sometimes, how she used to scrub floors until her fingers cracked, just so we could eat beans and rice and call it dinner. I used to think she was just being strong. I didn't understand that strength was the only choice she had. And now, standing in her shoes, I finally understand that the love of a parent is a kind of quiet madness. You give and you give until your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. So when my son raised his voice, I didn't hate him. No, child, I pitied him, because one day life will teach him what I already know, that love is never convenient. One day he'll have to care for someone who drains his patience, someone who makes him feel trapped. And maybe then he'll hear his own words echo back, "I'll send you away." And that echo will break him the way he almost broke me. But you know me, I don't believe in revenge, I believe in revelation, the kind that comes slow through living. That night I didn't fight him, I didn't shout, I told him stories. The little things he'd forgotten, like how he used to cry when the lights went out and I'd hum until he fell asleep. How I saved a jar of coins for 2 years to buy him a birthday cake. How I worked 12-hour shifts and still came home to help with his homework. He sat there quiet, his eyes softened, because stories have a way of melting walls. They remind us where we came from. They remind us who held us up before we could stand. You see, the weight of care isn't just what we carry, it's what we pass down. And if we don't pass down the story of our sacrifices, our children will mistake our endurance for obligation. They'll think we were strong because we had to be, not because we chose to love them through everything. So I told him that night, "Son, you may send me anywhere, but don't ever think it's gladly. Because love isn't about where you keep a person, it's about what you remember of them." He didn't speak, but I saw something shift in him. Maybe guilt, maybe understanding, maybe both, sometimes that's enough. And you, listening to me now, remember this. Don't hide your sacrifices so deep that your children forget they exist. Let them see the love not as a burden, but as a gift that costs something. Because when they understand that, they will never use your years as a threat. They will hold them as an inheritance. And that, my dear, is what it means to love without being erased. You know, child, memory is a funny thing. It's like an old quilt, pieces of laughter, pain and sacrifice stitched together, some parts bright as daylight, others worn thin by time. We don't always notice when the edges start to fray. But when someone forgets the stories that built them, that's when the cold starts creeping in. Memory is not just what we keep in our minds, it's the bridge that keeps love alive between generations. And when that bridge begins to crumble, families fall into silence. I remember sitting on the porch one evening after my son said those cruel words. The world had gone quiet except for the crickets. I stared out at the yard, at the trees that had seen him grow from a boy to a man. Every swing he ever took, every scraped knee, every birthday candle, all of it was still there in the soil. I whispered to myself, he doesn't remember me, that's why he can talk like that. Because forgetting doesn't just mean he lost a few memories, it means he lost the meaning of them. When people forget their stories, they start treating love like a transaction, like it has a price tag. They stop seeing the faces that shaped them, and all they notice are the wrinkles, the hospital bills, the inconvenience. That's why I told myself I wouldn't let my story die quietly. If my son was going to forget, I'd remind him, gently but firmly. So I started telling him the small things, not to guilt him but to teach him. I told him how when he was 3, he used to hold my finger so tight I'd lose feeling in it, but I never pulled away. How, during the hard years when his father left, I used to hum the same lullaby just to make the house feel like it still had a heartbeat. I told him about the time he failed his first test and thought the world was ending, and how I sat up half the night writing little notes of encouragement and slipped them into his lunch box for a week. He sat there pretending not to care, scrolling through his phone, but I saw his eyes glisten. Because memory, real memory, doesn't knock, it slips quietly through the cracks. The truth is, stories are medicine. They heal what resentment poisons. When a child remembers who held them, fed them, prayed over them, they start to see care not as a chore but as a sacred return. That's why I keep saying, don't wait until your voice shakes to tell your story. Don't wait until your children are too busy to listen. Tell it while they can still see the light in your eyes. Because if you don't tell them who you are, the world will make you smaller than you deserve to be. I once read somewhere that when an old person dies, a library burns down. And baby, that's the truth. Every wrinkle on my face is a chapter. Every scar is a paragraph. Every tear is punctuation. And if we don't pass down these chapters, the next generation will grow up with empty pages. They'll build lives with no roots, love with no memory, and they'll think they invented endurance. So when I talked to my son, I didn't scold him. I told him our family stories, the ones he'd half heard as a child but never understood. I told him how his grandfather walked 12 miles just to buy his grandmother her first pair of shoes, how his great-grandmother gave birth in a storm and still went out to milk the cows 2 hours later. Those people were the soil we grew from, and if you forget your soil, you'll wither. By the end of that talk, he wasn't looking at his phone anymore. His shoulders softened. He said, "Mama, I didn't know you went through all that." And I told him, "You weren't supposed to know then, baby. You were supposed to live, but you're grown now. And it's time you carried these memories not as guilt, but as honor." That's what I want you to understand. Memory isn't about living in the past, it's about carrying the past forward with respect. It's about saying, I see what was done for me and I'll live in a way that honors it. So when you go home tonight, sit with your elders. Ask them what it cost them to love you. Ask what they gave up. Listen not just with your ears but with your heart, because one day when they're gone you'll wish you, written down every word. And if you're the elder, don't stay quiet, speak your story. Whisper it, sing it, cry it, but tell it. Don't let anyone erase the road you walked, because memory is what turns sacrifice into legacy. And legacy, my dear, is how love stays alive long after we're gone. That's what I wanted my son to learn. That's what I want every child to know. Love is made of memory, and memory, when spoken with truth, can melt even the coldest heart. People don't always realize that words can wound deeper than knives. They think anger passes like a storm, that cruel things said in frustration get swept away with time. But they don't. Words plant themselves in the heart and they grow roots. They twist around your peace until you can hardly breathe. When my son looked at me that night and said, "I'll send you to that nursing home one way or another," and gladly, I felt those words crawl into my bones. He didn't raise a hand, but my body shook just the same. Because sometimes the sharpest kind of hurt doesn't leave a bruise, it leaves silence. I sat there quiet, not because I agreed, but because I was stunned. I'd always known my son had a temper, but I never thought he'd turn it on me. Maybe I thought love would protect me from that kind of cruelty. But love doesn't make people perfect, it just gives them a chance to do better. And in that moment he didn't. You see, child, the danger of harsh words isn't just that they hurt feelings, it's that they build a wall where a bridge used to be. Every "you're too much," every "I can't deal with you," every "you're better off somewhere else," each one adds another brick. Before long, families stop talking, they stop touching, they stop remembering they were once each other's safe place. That night after my son went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and thought about how easy it is for love to turn into resentment when people stop being kind. Kindness doesn't cost a thing, but neglecting it will cost you everything. I thought about all the times he came home crying from school, and I'd tell him, "Baby, watch your words. They can heal or they can break." I guess he forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. Maybe life wore him down, maybe he was scared of what my illness meant. People lash out at what they can't control, but still it hurt. The next morning I didn't yell, I didn't even bring it up. I just made breakfast like always, because that's what mothers do, we keep the rhythm of love even when the song changes. But as I buttered his toast, I realized something. If I didn't speak truth now, he might never learn. So I said softly, "Son, do you know how many times I could have sent you away? When you were wild, when you broke the law, when you shouted at me for rules you didn't like. But I didn't, I stayed. Because that's what love does, it stays even when it's tired." He didn't say a word, just kept eating. But I saw his hands tremble a little, because deep down he knew what he'd said wasn't anger, it was abandonment dressed as frustration. We live in a world now where people mistake bluntness for strength. They say cruel things and call it honesty. But real honesty has compassion. It tells the truth without destroying the person hearing it. The moment we start speaking without kindness, we start forgetting we're human. And child, don't ever think cruel words disappear. They echo. They find you when you're old and you start replaying your life like a film. They sit heavy in your chest. I've seen families torn apart not because of great betrayals but because of careless sentences that no one ever took back. "I don't need you. You're just in the way. I wish you'd go." People say them like they're nothing, but to the one who hears, they're everything. I remember once years ago my own mama told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Me, before you speak, picture your words hanging in the air. If you wouldn't want them to be your last, don't let them be your next." That stuck with me, because words outlive us. They become the story people tell about how we made them feel. So that night I decided I wouldn't throw his words back at him. I wouldn't curse or cry. Instead, I'd teach him one more time what mercy sounds like. I told him later, "Son, when you speak to me, remember who you're talking to. I'm not just your mother. I'm the woman who carried you, fed you, and forgave you more times than you'll ever know. I deserve your care, not your cruelty." And sometimes that's all it takes, a reminder of history wrapped in gentleness. He didn't apologize right away, but something changed in the way he looked at me after that. There was a softness that hadn't been there before. So listen, baby, don't underestimate the power of your words. They can either build someone up or tear them down so low they forget how to stand. Speak with kindness, especially to those who once held your whole world together. Because one day, when time humbles you and life turns you into the one needing care, you'll pray that the people around you remember your gentleness more than your anger. That's why I tell people, be careful with your tongue. It's small, but it can start fires or plant gardens. Choose which legacy you want to leave. You know, sugar, love ain't just about feeling something, it's about doing something. It's about showing up even when it's hard. I've learned that real care takes more than tears or promises. It takes planning, patience, and a whole lot of humility. Because when you love someone, truly love them, you don't just say, "I'll be there." You make sure that when the time comes, you actually can be. After that night my son spoke those words, sharp like thorns. I prayed on it. I didn't want bitterness to grow between us. So I decided we were going to talk, not as mother and son, but as two grown souls trying to understand what comes next. See, there's a dignity in preparing for what life will demand. Folks think talking about nursing homes, wills, or caretakers means you've given up. But no, honey, it means you're wise enough to meet tomorrow before it catches you unprepared. When we finally sat down, I told him, "Baby, you don't have to carry this burden alone. But don't make choices out of anger, make them out of love." He looked down, ashamed, but I could see his heart softening. I told him I wasn't scared of the idea of help, I was scared of being thrown away. There's a difference between care and convenience, child. One says, "Let's make sure you're okay." The other says, "Let's make sure you're out of my way." Care without compassion is just management, but care with compassion, that's love made visible. We went through everything that day, papers, medical things. What I wanted if my health got worse. He didn't like it, it made him nervous. But I told him, if we don't talk about it now, you'll have to talk about it later when I can't. I could see the realization hit him. He'd been so busy being angry he hadn't thought about what I might want, what I might fear. He saw me as a problem to fix, not a person to honor. But that conversation, it changed that. I told him, "Son, I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm afraid of dying unseen. I've spent my whole life being useful, loving, working. Don't let my last chapter be one of pity or impatience. Let it be one of respect. That's what dignity is. It's not fancy clothes or big houses. It's being treated like your life still means something, even when you can't do what you used to." And humility, oh, that's a tough one. It's not easy for a parent to accept help from the same child they once bathed and fed. Pride is a stubborn thing, but I told him, if you help me, let it be out of gratitude, not guilt. And if I accept your help, let it be out of trust, not shame. Because care should never humiliate, it should honor both giver and receiver. We have to start seeing agging not as a burden but as a shared journey. The young will one day stand where the old now stand. That's the circle of it all. So when we plan for those years, we're not planning for strangers, we're planning for ourselves just further down the road. I told my son, baby, one day it'll be you sitting here. You'll feel the ache in your bones, the slowness in your hands. And when that day comes, I pray that your children don't see you as a task to handle, but as a treasure to care for. And the only way to make sure of that is to show them how it's done, right now. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I think that was the first time he truly saw me as a person, not just mama, because that's another kind of dignity, to be seen again fully by your own child. Care, compassion, dignity, they're all braided together. You can't have one without the others. To plan for care is to plan for love to keep working, even when the body doesn't. It's saying, I won't leave you guessing. It's an act of mercy toward the ones who'll have to make hard choices. Before that day ended, he took my hand and said, Mama, I'll do better. And I smiled, because that's all any of us can promise, to do better with the time we have left. So if you're listening to me, child, don't wait until pain and guilt force the conversation. Sit with your people now. Ask what they want, how they wish to be remembered, what dignity means to them. Write it down, speak it out, make peace with it, because that's not morbid, it's merciful. And when the time comes to care for someone, don't do it because you have to. Do it because you remember the hands that once cared for you. Let compassion be your compass, dignity your map, and love your destination. Because when we plan with love, we're not just preparing for endings, we're building a legacy of grace that will outlive us both. That's the truth, baby, and that's what keeps families whole, even when time tries to pull them apart.